In this video, the second technical video in this series, we'll take a look at the control bar control and how that is used within the project punch list component. Control bar controls are used in the panel card headers and in some cases the panel card footer to display buttons that add and delete items or set search criteria or to navigate throughout the app panel cards. Some of the control bars contain disclosures for messages and some for the control of searching within the lists. Control bars allow the developer to easily build a responsive layout that automatically repositions its controls to accommodate the numerous device screen sizes and the device's orientation. Each control bar may have its own data, items, actions, properties, events, layouts, disclosures, custom CSS, and JavaScript. You can also call JavaScript functions that you may have defined for the component under Code JavaScript Functions. Let's look at the layout of the control bar used in the header of the first panel card. I haven't defined multiple layouts for any of the control bars, but you certainly could if you wanted a different layout for a tablet and a phone. This layout uses 3 buttons and an HTML control. The sync button on the left is used to commit any changes made to any of the list data to the server-side MySQL database. We only want this button to be enabled when data has actually been changed or new records have actually been added or records deleted. The search and new buttons are located to the right, with the HTML being displayed in the center on a line under the buttons. First, let's take a look at the functionality of the buttons. I'll click on Working Preview and then click the plus button to add a new record. Here we can see a new panel card transition into focus with the form view control I've defined for entering a new project record. If I click on the search button, a disclosure appears animating in from the top that allows me to enter some search text. The sync button to the left is not enabled. It will change to an enabled or active state if I make a change to any of the data or add a new record. Here you can see that after I have edited some data, the list has gone dirty and the sync button is now enabled. But the device may be offline or the server may not be available, so we're going to check for that condition before we try to fire off a callback. Let's go back to the control bar properties to see how this is implemented. The new button is defined as an image only and the icon is an SVG icon with a yellowish fill color. You need to create the item before you can add the action, then you can add the item to the control bar layout. The click action that will be initiated is the new button on click action. Let's see what that does. I'll click on the Actions tab and then look at the new button on click action. First, I'm getting a pointer to the control name list underbar projects and then calling one of my JavaScript functions, passing in the list object as an argument to close any row that may have been swiped to edit or delete. Next, I'm setting the form view new record property of the dialog object to my form view control, form view underbar 1, and calling the list object's new detail view record method, which will now use the specified form view control for data entry. Since the form view control contains a tab control, I want to make sure the first tab is always selected, and this block of code makes that happen. Finally, I'm transitioning the panel card into view. The search button is defined as an image only and the icon is a SVG icon. The search button underbar on click action will be called when this button is clicked or tapped. The search button on click action calls the show disclosure method of the control bar object. I generated this code by selecting the code genie and setting the properties. The code is then copied and pasted into place. The sync button is defined as an image only with both an icon and a disabled icon. I want the icon to spin if the sync button was pressed and an AJAX callback is in progress to update the MySQL server-side database. This is done with the code in the button class name. Here I'm using templating directives to add the class icon spin if the variable syncing is true. That variable is defined under the data tab. Let's take a look at that definition. We can see 2 data items defined, one called sync enabled that I'm using to control the state of the sync button, which is either enabled or disabled. I'm doing this with a watch event on the list projects. This will fire when any of the values change in the list. The return value is going to be true or false based upon a few properties of the list. If you look at the JavaScript, you'll see that I am returning the isDirty property and that I check the mode property to make sure it's not set to search. The next data item is the syncing variable, and it is set to false on app startup. If we switch back to the items tab, you'll see the disabled expression is set to not sync enabled. This may be toggled by the sync button on click event handler. Let's take a look at that. Here I'm calling the server is available method of the dialog object, which is our UX object. Since this method is asynchronous and I want to pass in the control bar object as an argument to my server available and server not available functions, I'm using a closure, setting the argument to the variable underbar this, which is instantiated just before I call server is available. This is a simple yet excellent example of using a closure in JavaScript. Let's look at the server available and server not available functions. I'll open the component's JavaScript functions, and in the server available function, you can see the control bar object is defined as a parameter. Assuming it is provided as an argument when the function is called, I'm setting the variable var names to the variable name that I set in the control bar, in this case syncing. Then I'm setting a value of true and data values, and finally including those values when calling the update method of the control bar object that was passed in. Next, I get a pointer to the list projects, call my close open rows function, and then save list edits for all rows. You may wonder, well, how is the syncing flag set to false when list synchronization is complete? That's handled by the after synchronized list event, which is available in the list detail view, client-side events, which you can see here. The best way you'll learn to look for these events is through experience. It's important to remember that the list has events and the detail view has events, and that even though I am using a form view control in place of a detail view for the data entry and editing for this list, the detail view events will fire whenever the list's save list edits method is called. If we go back into JavaScript functions and take a look at the server not available function, again you'll see that the function is expecting a control bar object to be passed in as an argument, and if it is, the value of the syncing variable is set to false and a disclosure is shown that will indicate that the server is not available at this time. Next, I'd like to discuss the two disclosures that I'm using in this control bar to display a message if the server is offline and to handle the search criteria. I'll click on the Disclosures tab and you can see that two disclosures have been defined. The first disclosure is used to display a message if the server is offline. If I look at the HTML, you'll see it's pretty simple. I'm defining a div and assigning the div the center text class, which is defined in the control bar's CSS tab, as you can see here. You can also see the class I've defined to handle the spinning sync icon. If I switch back to the Disclosures tab and select Disclosure 2, you'll see a template that is used to inject the content from the injectable container named injectable_1. This code is automatically generated for you by clicking the Insert Content from Injectable Container hyperlink in the lower left corner. When you click this link, you'll simply select the injectable container that you want to use. It should be obvious that you need to define the content of the injectable container before you can make this selection. I'll cancel that and let's look at the contents of the injectable container under bar 1. Notice that the injectable content is inserted after the panel navigator. This content will not be rendered until it is injected. I'll expand the container and I've included a text box control name, project underbar name, and a search and clear button. Let's take a look at the JavaScript attached to the search button click event to see how the search is implemented. First, I'm getting a pointer to the list and calling the list object's search list method, specifying a client-side search. Notice that I don't have an option to pass in the search text. I'll show you how that magically happens in a second. Then, I'm closing the displayed keyboard programmatically using the Ionic Keyboard plugin. Finally, I'm getting a pointer to the control bar and calling the hide disclosure method. The trick to making the list search work is to make sure the list control has a search part specified and that the search field map is set to the text control in the injectable container. That means you have to define the control in the injectable container prior to specifying the search part for the list. We've covered a lot of ground today relating to the control bar, and the techniques I've discussed are used within all of the control bars in this component. Take a look at each one, and you should now have a decent understanding of the programming that's driving the behavior you see within this app. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned a few things today that can help you when building your apps with Alpha Anywhere.